So, hallelujah. Say Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Welcome all into the house, to the 12 tribes of Yahusha scattered around the world. That's how James opened up his book. He said to the 12 tribes, and we know that they're scattered all over the world. And we say Shabbat Shalom to you and all sojourners, all of those who are journeying in Israel, the called out ones, the congregation, the assembly. Our Messiah, Yahusha, looked around and said, "These are my brothers, my sisters, and my mother, those who do the will of my Father, which is in heaven." So if you're in his will, then you are a brother, sister, mother unto the Meshiach. If you're not in his will, then you're not a part of him. So we salute all of those who are doing the will of our Father in heaven, and all of our brothers and sisters, all of the kings and queens, the Hebrews, Shebrews, those who are scattered abroad. That is truth. That is truth. When we look at what our Messiah said, that the day was coming where they were going to have to flee out of Judea, and they were going to be carried captive to the four corners of the earth. If you believe in the Messiah, you believe in the Meshiach, then you have to believe in what he said. And those are the words that he had spoken. And he was the prophet for us. I believe the last prophet. I know we have some people call themselves prophet. Even in the book of Acts, you had Agabus. I think that's what his name was, Agabus, who said, and they said he was a prophet, mainly because he had foretold some things. He said that, Shaul was going to go down to Jerusalem. They're going to bind him, and he was going to be in prison, and that happened. But Agabus wasn't writing any precepts. So the prophets that we listen to are those who actually wrote the precepts. Now our Messiah didn't write the precepts because it all ended with him. He didn't have to write anything because he fulfilled. He said in Hebrews chapter 10, he says, "Lo, I come in the volume of the book. It is written of me." And so he didn't have to write anything else. Everything had already been written. And so that was the end of it. The prophets were writing all the way up to the Messiah. Once the Messiah comes, there's nothing else that needs to be written. It's like when you get to the end of a movie, you see all the credits and hey, that's it. That's the end. So there's nothing to be added to him, and there's nothing to be taken away from him. And so we're appreciative unto him today. We're going to speak to you for this lesson leading up to about 1 o'clock Central Time. We have a memorial service for our beloved Sister Lorraine V.C. Peniston, and we also received some saddening news. We lost our brother today, Brother Rocky Smith, Deacon Emeritus Rocky Smith. Passed away, went on to be in the spirit in Yahusha, waiting for the resurrection. And so we're saddened. We're praying for both these families, for Sister Eileen Smith and Miriam and Caleb and Cedric Smith and all of them. We're praying for all of them. And then also for the VC family, our prayers are going up. I just want to say you got to be ready, because you don't know when he's going to come get you. You have to be ready. You don't have to be sick to pass. You don't have to be young. You don't have to be old. He's got a day where he's going to call all of us. It's upon us to be ready when that call is made. When he makes that call to you and he says, "Come on," you have to be ready. And your life is going to be a testament. Your life is a book. Everything that you said is going to be brought back. Everything that you've done. Brother Shaul said in 2 Corinthians 5:10, he said that we all must appear before the judgment seat of the Meshiach. And then we have to give an account for everything that we've done in this body, both good and evil. So all of it's going to be weighed out. My life is that the way I'm living is I want more good than bad, because I think if we all look at ourselves, we've all done some bad. It's just that we want our good to outweigh our bad, and knowing that He is going to be a righteous judge. He will judge righteous. It says in Hebrews 6, I think it's verse number 10, He says He will not forget the labor of love where you've ministered to the saints, and you do minister. He's not going to forget your labor of love. That goes into your book. And so what we do for one another is we love our brother, love our sister, put away the foolishness, put away the corruption, put away the evil. We just have to put things off and shed things off that is unlike our Father, unlike our Messiah, unlike the ones that He had called and gave us an example that we should follow. We are preparing, and we're preparing ourselves naturally and physically. We're preparing ourselves for the kingdom. When our Messiah came, he came and He said, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." At the time that our Messiah was here, they were not the natural or the physical kingdom that they had wanted to be, or like the former days. That's why you see in Acts, the first chapter, and I think it's verse number 6, when he was getting ready to ascend up into the Shamayim, and they asked Him the question, "Are you going to restore the kingdom unto Israel at this time?" And He says, "It's not for you to know the time or the seasons, what the Father has planned." So He wanted them to be witnesses and to go out of Jerusalem, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth and be that witness. And we found out that when He was talking about the world and loving the world, as we read in John 3:16, Yahuchanan 3:16 on Wednesday, and He was talking about, my Father, Elohim, had loved the world so much that He gave His only begotten Son. And then it says, to whosoever believeth, because when He talked about, in that verse, in John 3:16, Yahuchanan 3:16, there's two things that are represented in that verse. The first one is the world, where a lot of people get confused about what the world is. Because you have to be in the mindset. You have to understand the language and the culture. And I know a lot of people push back against you. They say you're doing a cultural thing. It's all about culture, and it's not about the spirit and everything. And that's just not true. In order to understand what He's saying spiritually, you have to understand the culture and where He came from. You have to understand where our Messiah came from, the nation that He came from, in order to understand the spiritual. Because if we simply accept the spiritual without understanding the natural and where He came from, then you can see where you can get off on different tangents, and to where people will even say Israel doesn't matter. Well, that's not true, that Israel doesn't matter. And those who make that statement are not making a true statement. Throughout the scripture, even Shaul, when he taught in Romans chapter 3, and he says, "What advantage have the Yahudim?" And he said, "Much in every way." So, there is an advantage with Yahudim. Why? Because chiefly unto them was given the oracles. So He gave the oracles. He didn't give the oracles to Egypt. He didn't give the oracles to Ethiopians, and these were nations at that time. He didn't give the oracles to the Canaanites, to the Hittites, to the Jebusites. He did not give the oracles to the Greeks, or he did not give the oracles to the Romans. That's not who he gave the oracles to. He gave the oracles to Yahusha. It was them that had it. And so we're still looking at John 3:16, but I want to go to Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse number 29. And it says, the secret things belong unto Yahuwah our Elohim, but those things which are revealed belong unto us. And this is who's speaking here. This is Meshiach who is speaking right before his death, because he was going to die, and he was handing it off to Yahusha, who was coming up behind him. Yahusha was Meshiach's successor that led him into the promised land. And he's telling them the secret things belong unto Yahuwah our Elohim, but those things which are revealed, they belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. So when you want to look at the things that are being revealed, he's revealing it unto Yahusha. Now, some people have a problem with that, and I can't help you if you have a problem, but you can't go against Scripture. You can't go against his word. You can't go against prophecy. You can state your opinion, and we all have our opinion, but the word has to have precedent. It has to be, the oracles came down from heaven unto Meshiach, who gave them to Yahusha. You can't change that. We can disagree. You can get heated around the collar. You can do all kind of things, but you're not going to change what's written in this book. And so he even goes on to say, as we'll get into our lesson, you're not to add anything to this, and you're not to take nothing away. So when somebody tries to dismantle that or tries to take that away and say, yeah, he was with Israel, Yahusha, but they failed, they committed idolatry, spiritual wickedness, spiritual fornication, they committed adultery, and so he forsook them, he cut them off, and that was a type and a shadow of the church. That's not true. That is, yes, they did commit those offenses against them, but that's why he sent his son. When you look at what he says in John 3:16, when you look at what he said, he loved, and you look at that word world, but what he's dealing with is his witness. So we've seen that in John 3:16, and then in Isaiah chapter 45 and verse number 17. And he says, Yahusha shall be saved in Yahuwah with an everlasting salvation. Ye shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. This is a repetitive or a repeating witness. He's saying that those who are my witnesses, they will never be ashamed or confounded, because he's given unto Yahusha an everlasting salvation. Now, does that mean everybody who is Yahusha going to be saved? No, because he came unto his own. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. It was his own people that turned him over to the Romans. And it was his own people that he said, if you could see with your eyes and hear with your ears and understand with your heart, I would have to convert you. I would have to save you. But there was things that was hidden so that they could not see it, because there's some people he does not intend to save. And I know that's hard. It's hard to accept that reality, that there's just some people he's not going to save. But when you read Shaul knew it, Romans chapter 9, he said they were fitted for destruction. He made some to be redeemed unto life everlasting. And then he had some that were fitted for destruction, so that he can show how righteous he is in his judgment. He would be going against his own self, his own word, if somebody lived a corrupt life, evil life, sinned all the time. He says the soul that sinneth is going to die. He would be unrighteous to take somebody who is fully corrupt all their life and then turn around and give them everlasting life. That's not just. That's not judgment. We see how unjust our courts are. Our Father's not like that. He said the soul that sinneth, it's going to die. That's plain as day. So when he says world without end, those are his witnesses, the ones who are going to repeat forever and ever and ever. It's not dealing with the dirt of the earth, the cosmos in heaven. That's not what he's dealing with. He's dealing with his witness. Let's look at verse number 18 here, Isaiah 45:18. For thus saith Yahuwah that created the Shamayim, Elohim himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. So this is the Shamayim, the heavens, the cosmos, that the Greeks call it cosmos. And then you have the earth or the arats and everything. He says, I made that to be inhabited. But that's not why I'm sending my son. I'm not sending my son for the dirt, the rocks, the trees, I'm sending my son for my witnesses, those who have, and then we see, and then let's finish up 18 and then 19, then I want to go to Isaiah 43, trying to do a recapitulation on what we said Wednesday and kind of move on. And at the end of verse 45, 18, he says, I am Yahuwah, there is none else. I have not spoken in secret in a dark place of the earth. I said not unto the seed of Jacob, ye seek me in vain. I, Yahuwah, speak righteousness. And then he goes on to say what? I declare things that are right. So be careful, feeble man, when you speak against things that he's already declared as right. You have to be careful. We speak words without knowledge. A lot of times we speak words without knowledge. We're not fully grasping because we have not been trained. Our culture and our teachers have not trained us to understand the language and the culture so that we can understand some of the secret things and the things that he has revealed. We're not taught like that. Our teaching is not like that. I was born of the water and born of the Spirit, fully immersed in his name and was filled with the Ruach Kodesh. I know what happened. I know that birth that I had in my spirit, which was real, and it changed me. And if you say you're born of the water and spirit and there's no change in you, you have not been born of the water and the spirit. The water and spirit brings about a change in you. That work that he's done as far as your birth process, being born of water and spirit, is authentic and true. Then he says, as newborn babes, you desire the sincere milk of the word. So after you're born of water and spirit, now there's teachers that must teach you this word, teach you this book. I have to be taught the word. There's nothing wrong with the birth process. Ain't nothing wrong with that. What he does is just, good, and right. Like he says, I declare things that are right. You ain't going, my word is forever settled in heaven. Can nobody go up there and change my word? Yes.
So is that kind of blasphemy when they speak without knowledge, or they against truth?
Is that blasphemy? No, blasphemy, when you speak against the Spirit, the Ruach Kodesh, his holy, when you speak against that. Now Yahusha says you can speak against me and that'll be forgiven. You know, and there's a lot of times people don't understand him. There is a lot of words going against the Messiah, the human being. And he says that'll be forgiven. Don't speak against the Spirit.
And I thought the Spirit, I thought the Spirit and his word were one.
Yes. Because we would not know his Spirit if he had not given us his word. Even when, and I use myself as an example, I was born of the Spirit. Now I have to be taught. And what am I taught? I'm taught the word. Now you got to get this word in me. There's times where temptation comes up. The word tells me, thou shalt not. I have to know the word. There's nothing wrong with the birth and the Spirit, but I have to know the word. The word is going to teach me what's right and what's wrong. And everybody has to be taught. Now you have some teachers, they teach, but let's go to Romans chapter 10. Let's look at verse 1 and 2. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Elohim for Yasharal is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of Elohim, but not according to knowledge. So the birth process it's perfect, it's beautiful, it's something you can't debate. There is no debate. After the birth process, now I've got to be taught. I have to have some knowledge. Because if I don't get taught knowledge, I'm going to form my own knowledge. Because he says that for being ignorant of Elohim's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of Elohim. Now, there's two things I want to say about this, especially these first 4 verses. There's two things. What I'm trying to say is you have a lot of people that will go after their own righteousness and start teaching their own righteousness and not the righteousness of the Most High. The righteousness of the Most High, even Shaul, the righteousness of the Most High, I have to go to Torah to get that. I've got to go to Torah to get the righteousness of the Most High. Because if I don't, then men will start to establish their own righteousness. And so they'll start teaching their own righteousness, thinking they're in the will of Elohim. This must be right. Why? Because I don't like it.
Could that be what's going on in the recent situation with associated that they responded in their own intellect? Like they were convinced with what they're saying.
Yeah. We do have knowledge and intellect that's given to us as we grow up in life. So if I'm not following after the righteousness of this book, I'm going to use the things that I was taught as right and wrong, and I'm going to use that as my righteousness, and a lot of times teach that as righteousness to somebody else. Okay, so we grow up in this country, in this culture, and most people know about salvation before they even step foot in a church. They pretty much have formed in their minds and in their heart what's right and what's wrong with the church before they even set foot in it. they have a sense because of what's taught to them. You know, you have some families, they teach high standards, high values, and high morals. So when they're born of water and spirit, they take that with them. You know, my father always taught me to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. If you ain't up at 5 o'clock in the morning, something's wrong with you. Righteousness says and I'm just using this as an example. Righteousness says you're up at 5 in the morning, but you ain't got no book for that. You know, but because you were raised by a drill sergeant, now you want to run the whole church like they're on a drill, like you're in the military. Because that's how you were raised, and that's how you were brought up, and that's how you were learned. So you use a lot of that as righteousness when you do in your teaching and everything. But that's not what the book is teaching as far as righteousness. So that's what he says here, being ignorant of Elohim's righteousness, they go about to establish their own. And you see a lot of legalism in the church, or the called out ones, or the ecclesia, or the assembly. You see a lot of legalism that's not written in Torah, because men and teachers are going about to establish their own righteousness, and so they're going to teach you their righteousness. Now, I might have something against, I got something against theaters. Anybody goes to theater, you're in sin. Because for me, my conviction is, I just don't like theaters. It could be certain cars, certain vehicles. It could be certain type of attire. All of our attire comes from Europe. Let's face it. Let's just be honest. It comes from Europe. That's how we dress. We dress like Europe dresses us. I was watching a movie the other day, and I was looking at when it was made, and it was made in 1999. And it was over in England. And some of the things that they was wearing in 1999 is very popular today, because it came from England. One thing I really noticed was, I don't want to, just don't take it the wrong way, but just looking at the fashion and everything, and some of the fashions that they had, especially with the women, to where they were wearing the spandex reveal all attire in 1999. This is 2021. And you're thinking, we thought that might have been new within the last 5-6 years. No, it finally got here as fashion. But they was wearing that years ago over in England, because that's where we get our fashion from. Now, somebody might think that unless you wear, the European shirt and European pants and everything, then unless you wear that type of garb, then there's something, they might not like this. This doesn't look like, that doesn't look like church. Well, what is your righteousness when it comes to church? You think we grew up and everybody had to wear a white shirt or certain color shirts, brown and black shoes. Men had to be clean shaved in order to come up here. There was just all kind of legalism and righteousness that was brought in. They were doing it, they had a zeal, but not according to knowledge. Because my zeal now, I've got to have zeal, but let my zeal be according to the righteousness of Elohim, which is expressed in Torah. Because we get all things, we start using cultural things as righteousness in this culture, which our Messiah didn't grow up in this culture. And I want to get to some things in Ezra, because we're at the time in the season. I'll be glad when it's over. But our Messiah wouldn't have nothing to do with this stuff that's going on today. He wouldn't. It's driven by a culture that has their own gods. Now, for us, for Yahusha and everybody who's called into Yahusha, if you are like Ruth said, because Ruth was a Moabite, and the Moabites had their God. But Ruth said, I ain't leaving you. Your Elohim's my Elohim. Your people's my people. I'm changing over. And that's a proselyte. She was proselytized in. But she had to be proselytized into Yahusha. She had to accept Yahusha's Elohim. She had to accept Yahusha's people. And that's where her salvation was. Now, you got people who are raised under different cultures around the world, and except you believe and believe in their convictions, well, maybe your conviction is not what was written to Israel or Yahusha. I have to obey that because my book tells me what sin is. And so my spirit lines up with the word, and it teaches me what sin is. Now, you might think sin is going to a ball game. But there's nothing written in Scripture about going to the ball game. You might have a conviction about going. I went to a ball game and I heard some rowdy people. And they was just swearing all them people all over acting crazy and everything. Stay away from the ballpark. Well, that might be your conviction, but there's no Scripture in that. Well, it's not good for your spirit. It might not have been good for yours. I don't know where you're at, but it might not have been. Some of us don't like to hear any profanity. Some of us can listen. I have to put up with. I hear a little bit of it. Then some of it's just so blatant. Hey, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm just not even gonna. If that's how you're gonna speak, I don't want to be around you. Don't come into my house. Don't come to my presence. Especially don't come into my house with that type of profanity. That's just my conviction. When the book talks about swearing, that's talking about casting a spell or casting a curse. Cursing is putting a curse on somebody, casting a spell on somebody. Now every culture has profanity in their language. In England, if you say bloody in England, that's profanity. Now you say bloody over here, it's not profanity. Over there, you can use that word and it's like, man, some people take offense to it because it's like profanity. Now, for us, that's not profanity. There are words of profanity. I don't believe in profanity. I don't think we can speak profanity and that's righteousness. I don't think that's righteousness. But I know that there is different cultures that have different words that means bad things. I don't want to learn that. I want to, keep myself from that. But the point that I'm trying to make is people have a zeal and they go around and they go around teaching their own righteousness. And they're not going after the righteousness of Elohim, because the righteousness of Elohim is good for us no matter where we're at. Our Messiah knew that he knew of the lost tribe of the northern kingdom. He knew about that because when he had his 12, 2 by 2, and the 70, he sent them out to the lost sheep of the house of Yahusha. So he knew they were out there. He prophesied that everybody in Judea was going to have to get out. And that comes from Jeremiah, the 13th chapter. Everybody in Judea was going to have to flee. He says, not one of you going to be left. All y'all got to get out. So he knew that. So when we look at the kingdom and what he was speaking of as far as the kingdom and the righteousness of Elohim, you can take the kingdom and the righteousness of Elohim and go to any parts of the earth, even if you're in captivity, and still keep the righteousness of Elohim. And still keep it. Because he knew that was going to happen. He knew that was going to happen. Even when Yahusha went into captivity, the first one was the northern kingdom. They went into captivity with the Assyrian Empire. But he did not want his people to succumb to their gods, their idolatry, and their practices. He didn't want them to. He says, I've already given you how you're supposed to live. Even in captivity, he knew they was going to go into captivity. Yeah, but you got my words. You can still be kept by my words. The righteous, and that's why we have to look at and understand what the righteousness of Elohim is. That's one point of the first four verses here in Romans 10 and 4. The zeal that he's talking about and with Yahusha is because they were going about to establish their own righteousness. So they were adding to. And that's why he told he told his people, when you go into the synagogue on the Sabbath and they sit in Moses' seat, he says, do what they say or what they teach, but don't do as they do, because they've added a lot of stuff to it. They've added a lot of stuff. And we've learned what that was. It's like fence laws. All of that, they added all. No. He said, because earlier he says, through your tradition, you made my word of none effect because of your traditions. And we get so caught up in tradition that his word doesn't have an effect on us because we're bound by our tradition. I believed in my heart and in my mind, if I did not go to church on Sunday, I had committed sin. And that was not transgression. That is not transgression. Not going to church on Sunday is not transgression. But they taught their righteousness so much and the cultural righteousness so much that if I didn't go to church on Sunday, I felt I was sinning. And there's no scripture for that. None whatsoever. He taught us to keep the Shabbat. He said, keep the Shabbat, keep it holy. Because when you do that, when we keep the Shabbat and we keep it holy, then we align ourselves with him. His sign is on us. That's in the book. Because he says, if you do it, just like I worked 6 days in creation, I rested the seventh. When you rest on the seventh, you align yourself with me. Aren't we in his image? We're supposed to be in his image, in his likeness. 6 days you flex or work, seventh day you rest. And that's how we do it, because we're in his image. Now, somebody who totally kicks to the right the Shabbat and say it doesn't exist anymore and it's not right and all that, everybody who do that, then you're not in his image. Because in his image, he rested on the seventh day. So if I'm in the image of Elohim, if I say I'm the image of Elohim, I'm in the image of the Messiah, then I keep the Shabbat because I'm in that image. Not just the Shabbat, because our book teaches us what sin is. I still can't lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, the pride of life. If you have that, then the love of the Father is not in you. The love of Yahuwah is not in you if you have the lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. It's not there. So in chapter Romans 10, where we're at here, he's talking about those who have a zeal and they're going about to establish their own righteousness. So he tells them in verse 4, he's saying the Meshiach is the end of the law for righteousness' sake to everyone that believeth. Now, if you don't understand what he's talking about, that's why he says doctrine has to be line upon line, line upon line. So you have to read it within its text. So what he's saying here, because you're trying to establish your own righteousness, you don't add anything to the Meshiach. The Meshiach is the end of the law of righteousness. That means you don't add nothing to it. My example, my model is the Meshiach. And that's why Shaul, who they call Paul, said, follow me or imitate me as I imitate the Meshiach. Because that's the end. You don't add nothing else to it. So you had some who were in Yahusha who wanted to add to it. He says, I don't want you to add, don't add nothing to this book. He said, those who add to this book are going to receive the curses that are in this book. So my example is the Meshiach. My example is Christ, because that's where it ended. There's nothing else written after Christ, after the Meshiach. Nothing else. Now, wait a minute. What do you mean? What are you saying nothing else? When you look at the Messiah and his life and the work that he finished, you don't add to it. That's what he's saying here. You don't add to that. There's nothing else to add. He was perfect. He fulfilled. It was done right. I mean, you can't indict him on anything. And so it all ended right there. So are we looking for another Messiah? No. That was That was it. That's what he's saying here. Some people look at this and they think, well, see, the law's done away with. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying that. He's dealing with somebody that's trying to add their own righteousness. And you've heard me say before, Yahusha Meshiach couldn't be saved in some folks' churches because they have so much legalism. They have so much, they've added so much. It says in Ecclesiastic, it says, do not be overly what? Righteous. In Ecclesiastic, he says, be not overly righteous. I mean, you got some folks, it's hard to come out of the house. I mean, and everything they do, they just, I can't do this, can't do that. I can't look to the left, can't look to the right. I go into the store, I don't want to look at no clothing. Why? Because I don't have no lust in my heart. Wait, I mean, they're overly righteous. I mean, wait a minute, what are you doing? That's why we have markets. If you got the money, then you can buy it. You look at it and you can buy it. We're even told, because I heard this before, if you go out to the mall and you're not going to buy anything, that's sin. Because you're going out there to look at stuff and you're lusting after it. And so it's like, don't go out to the mall unless you got money, because if you go out there without money and you just window shopping and you just looking at stuff, you're lusting after stuff. And that's not what he's dealing with, because he even tells us, if you got the money, whatever your soul desires, so I can look at things. Oh, I like that. I like those colors. I know how those colors look on me. That's what I want. So you have people who were overly righteous. So what he's saying here is, don't establish your own righteousness. We've already got a pattern for righteousness, and that's the Meshiach. He's the paradigm. Don't add to him. When he says he's the end of it, don't add to him, because some people want to add to it. Show me where Christ says, don't be a Chicago Bears fan. Show me what. Yeah, you probably shouldn't be one, because they're perennial losers. Now, if they make you want to use profanity, then yeah, you better stop. You better stop watching them. But don't put your righteousness on me that you added to this book, because the Meshiach is the end of it. I got to look at him. I don't need nobody to add anything to it. Even Shaul said in Corinthians, he says, this is me, not Yahusha. Let me say this. He says, and I think I should know, and he added some stuff to it. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It's right there. He says, this is not Yahusha, this is me. He says, but I think I have the right to say this, and then he goes on to say some things. Okay, well, thank you, Shaul. Thank you for that. But my paradigm now is Yahusha. That's my motto. It ends right there. I would have I've grown because I didn't see this before, but you should have a problem if your Meshiach doesn't keep Torah. That should be alarming to you. If you're following a Christ that doesn't keep Torah, man, that alarm bells ought to go up. No. We got to keep, I want to follow the Messiah that kept Torah. And that's my motto. That's what I follow in. That's where I walk. If the Messiah was here today, he would be looking for a synagogue on this day, to go into the synagogue on the Shabbat, because that was his custom and his practice, because that's what Yahshua did, because the oracles was given to them. And so that's what they did. Our Messiah would not be set a foot up in these churches on Sunday. He wouldn't. You know why? Because he knows what it represents. He knows what he knows where it came from. He would be asking y'all, why y'all breaking the Sabbath? Why y'all doing it on the first day? Do you know where that came from? Do you know the culture that gave you that? Do you know the one who enforced it? And most of all these big name teachers and preachers and pastors, he's and she, everybody, they would say no. Because none of them has taken any time to put Constantine on trial. They rather talk about us and put us on trial, but they don't want to put Constantine on trial. I mean, it's out there. Anybody can do some research. Every pastor in the United States of America do some research and find out it was Constantine that enforced first day worship. Son evictus. It was Constantine that did it. Now, you would have people who will backslide out of the churches, the kirkas. They would backslide if you told them, hey, y'all need to quit doing that on the first day of the week. You need to do it on the 7th. You got folks that would they almost cuss you out. I mean, you got some folks, man, they're hardcore. And there's no book to support first day worship. You don't have no Bible to do that. The end of it is our Messiah. That's where it is. Did he do first day worship? No. Well, Mary Magdalene got to the tomb on the first day of the week and he had risen. It says, well, let's look at that. Let's go to Yahuchanan. Yahuchanan chapter 20, and let's look at verse number 1. Yahuchanan 20:1, the first of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark. Sun hadn't come up yet. I mean, she was there before the sun came up. Unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone turned away from the sepulchre. He had already left the tomb before sunlight. So if you ask me, I believe he rose on the Shabbat. Because nobody went there on the Shabbat because it was the Shabbat. Nobody went there because that was his day. Yes.
I totally agree with you. And I also this. I think that he was raised up even before the 6 o'clock time, and it was probably about 3 o'clock because it said 3 days and 3 nights. So if he actually rose up after 6, that would have been
That night, right.
4 days and 3 nights. That would have
Right. Right, because it was 3 days and 3 nights. Right. So probably about the time that he gave up the ghost, probably the time that he rose from the dead. It's just that nobody was there when he rose from the dead. Nobody. Nobody witnessed him coming up, walking out of that tomb. Nobody witnessed it. Mary gives her account because she got there before the sun came up. He was already gone. So all of this, he rose on the first day of the week. No, he didn't. I mean, we sing songs that aren't even telling the truth because we want to go about and establish our own righteousness, which is not the righteousness of Elohim. It's not his right. He does. Didn't we read that in Isaiah 45? He says, I declare things that are right. I declare things that are right. Who are you to go against that? We put men and women in that position to where they can come about and establish their own righteousness, and we accept it. We do that. We do that. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter number 11. Let's look at let's start with verse 12. Let's start with verse 12. 2 Corinthians 11 and 12. But what I do, that I will do, that I may cut off occasion from them which desire occasion, that wherein they glory, they may be found even as we. So then verse number 13, he says, for such are false apostles. In his day, he said there were false apostles. Now, a second witness to this is in Revelation, where it says they say they are apostles and you found them to be liars. Now, I wonder, how did you find them to be liars? Because you have to compare them to the word. That's why Yahushua says you have to try every spirit. So how do I try the spirit, or how do I find them as liars? Is because I go to the book and read it. I can read it out of the book. So I read it out of the book that his custom, the culture and everything, they kept the Shabbat. Even the first century, all of them kept the Sabbath. It's in the book. So you got people now that's saying, no, you don't. Keep the first day of the week. Well, where did you get that from? I know where you got it from. You got it from Constantine. Do you know where you got it from? You know, do you know where you got it from? I know where you got it from. Do you know where you got it from? So it says in Revelation, they found them to be liars because I can go to the book and read it myself. Now notice he says, false apostle, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of the Meshiach. Men, we hold in high esteem. Just as long as people know when they're in leadership positions and they're elevated, just as long as you know the higher up you go, the less mistakes you can make. You can get so high up, you better not make a mistake. You can't afford to. Ask Brother Moses. Ask him. He was the lawgiver. He led Israel, Yahusha, out of Egypt. He put up with them for 40 years. He got into a discussion with the Most High. He said, these are your people, the Most High. These are your people. Said they're a stiff-necked folk. Musha was the meekest man on earth. But when it came to going over into the promised land, everybody that came out of Egypt, except died in the wilderness, that were 20 and over. Everybody who came out of Egypt, 20 and over, died in the wilderness except for 2 people. Even Musha couldn't go over into the promised land for one thing that he did. One thing. He said, I told you to speak to the rock. You smote the rock. You didn't glorify me, so you can't go in. I'll let you see it, but you can't go in. One thing. I wonder how many offenses we have against him. That was one thing he did that kept him out of the promised land. So you got these who transformed themselves into the apostles of the Meshiach. Then he goes, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into a what? An angel of light. He's not coming to you with horns on his head, a red, looking like a mule or a donkey, evil, breathing fire. That's not how he's coming to you. Mm-mm. He's coming as an angel of light. Yes.
Well, they got these, I think that television show Lucifer, I don't know if it's still on, but he gets to portray him as like this like charming, like just a handsome human
Yes.
male.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I mean, he's not coming, he's a deceiver. So he has to deceive you. If he showed up like that, people would run. I can't deceive them. They won't even come around me. I've got to be able to deceive them. So I have to be one of them. I have to come at them like, so he's transformed as an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves as ministers of righteousness. He said in Romans, they had a zeal, but not according to knowledge. They go about to establish their own righteousness. So they're transformed as ministers of righteousness. You can't deceive folks. The best way you can deceive folks is to be one of them, to look like, speak kindly to them, comfort them. Oh, it's going to be all right, brother. Oh, it's going to be all right, sister. Get them away from the book, reading the book. It's amazing how everybody's writing all these books, got all these books out there. What about the book that has stood 3,500, 4,000 years? The book, what about that one? Because this is the only thing that's going to stand in the Shamaim. He said, forever is my word settled in the Shamaim. You can't get up there and erase nothing. The Shabbat day is real today as it was back then, as it's going to be tomorrow. How can you believe in Hebrews 13:8, Yahusha Meshiach, the same yesterday, today, and forever, and you changing? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. So, establishing their own righteousness. What we have to do is everything that's written in this book as far as our righteousness, we have to understand that we're capable of doing that, especially where we're at. Anywhere you are in the world, the righteousness that's in this book can be kept. The kingdom, when you look at the kingdom that we're supposed to be a part of, that we've been born into, that kingdom, we can keep the righteousness in that kingdom no matter where we're at. We should be able to. Forgive me. I had to charge my phone because the battery was getting low, so there's nothing. The only thing that when it talks about Musha and the law of Musha and the only thing that the spirit of what Musha was teaching as far as righteousness, we can keep all of that. We have to understand what is the righteousness of the law for us to keep. We have to understand that. It's not that we're doing away with it or moving away from it at all. We just have to know, okay, I'm in captivity. I'm not over in Israel. There are certain teachings in the law that can only be kept in Yasharal. Well, I know I'm not there, so I don't have to worry about that. So that's why let's go to Romans chapter 8 and verse number 1. There is therefore now no condemnation to them who are in Meshiach, Yahusha, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Now, just reading that verse there, what I'm trying to, because I want to see if there's any questions in the chat that I need to try to answer. If there's any question, I'm going to try to answer those. So in Romans 8 here, just by reading that first verse there, what are we talking about? What is he starting to address here in that first verse? There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Meshiach Yahusha, who walk not after the flesh, but what? After the... So what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with the walk of the flesh and the walk of the Spirit. That's what he's addressing, these two things. You've got the flesh that wants to do its own thing, and then you got the Spirit. And so I have to understand that even though I've been born again of water and spirit and have a new nature now, but I'm still in this human body, this fleshly body. I'm still here. And if I walk after, because we'll finish reading down here, but if I walk after this flesh to fulfill the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, if I keep walking after that, I'm not walking after what? The Spirit. If I want to fulfill the lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, that's the walk after the flesh. That's not the walk after the Spirit. So here I am, I'm still in the flesh. I still know what sin is. And even folks who get born again, you know what sin is. You know the sins you committed. You still know what sin is. But by walking after the Spirit, I'm not fulfilling the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. I'm not fulfilling that. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the walk of the flesh and the walk of the Spirit. Now let's look at verse number 2. For the law of the Spirit of life in Meshiach Yahusha have made me free from the law of what? Sin and death. So now he's talking about two different laws. We got the law of the Spirit, which is the life that we have in Yahusha Meshiach, and you have the law of sin and death. Now, where do you think the law of sin and death is? It's in our flesh. The law of sin and death is here. So, because see, Paul, if you go back to chapter 7, Paul discovers something. He said, oh my goodness, I'm dealing with all this stuff. He says, even though I have new nature, I've been born, sin is still present. It's still present. So he says, I've found a new law. There's a law in my members, and it's called the law of sin, and it's still present in my members. That's why he goes on in chapter 7, he says, oh, wretched man that I am. And this is after his conversion. He said, in another place, he says, I put no confidence in what? The flesh. I put no confidence in the flesh. He says, oh, wretched man that I am, who's going to deliver me from the body of this death? So he's talking about the law of life, the law of the Spirit, which is in our Messiah, and the law of sin and death, which is in our members. So now verse number 3, for what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh. Now, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with the walk of the flesh and the walk of the Spirit. So he's saying, for what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh. So what had been given unto them, if you're still walking after the flesh, you're not going to fulfill the righteousness or the law of the Spirit that's in our Messiah. Because the flesh wars against the Spirit, and comparing my flesh to what was given through Meshiach was what Meshiach gave. Is that stronger than my flesh? Actually, it is, because my flesh, I can't, in the flesh, people, as soon as you say law, people fight you. As soon as you say it, you got a fight on your hands, because nobody wants to submit to law and order. They want to be able to, I'm not under no law. Law is death. Law is most people who fight with law, there's still law that they obey and follow. It's just they want to pick and choose what they want to follow. Because in the body of the Meshiach, we know you're not supposed to steal. We know that. So in my new life, I don't steal. Why? Because the law says thou shalt not steal. You know, I found in me as I walk after the Spirit, it's easier for me when I walk after the Spirit to love my brother. Why? Because the law says thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So I find that easier for me to do because of the new nature that I have. I have to study the law to understand the law. So in verse 3 here, for what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, listen to the antidote. Listen to the antidote. So what did the Most High do? Since he gave us a law and he's seen that the flesh continued to sin, there's nothing wrong with the law, because the law is holy, just, and good. He says in Romans 7, and I think it's verse 12, he says the law is holy, just, and good. That's the law. In Psalms 19 and 7, it says the law is perfect. So, where is the law weak? In the flesh. So when in the flesh, when I want to, because he's dealing with two walks now. So when I want to walk after the flesh and not after the Spirit, then I'm going to succumb to the flesh and give credence to the flesh and succumb to the flesh instead of succumbing to the Spirit. So what was the antidote of that? What the Most High, because see, a lot of people think that, and I'm going to try to bring that out. A lot of people don't think that when Meshiach gave the law, it was spiritual. And it actually was spiritual. And hopefully we'll get to that. So what's the antidote? Elohim, what did he do? Sending his own son in the likeness of what? Sinful flesh, because that flesh is weak. When it comes to law and order, the flesh is weak. I don't want to keep that. Well, you have to. I don't want to keep it. I ain't under your law. I ain't under that. I can do what I want to do. So what he did was, I'm going to send my own son in likeness of sinful flesh. And not only in the likeness of sinful flesh, but for sin. Whose sin? Not his. He didn't have none. So when it says for sin, that's for me. That's for me. He sent his son in likeness of sinful flesh and for sin, because I know sin. He don't know sin. What did our book teach us? He became sin. Not for himself, but for me. Now, you might not accept it, but I do. He became sin for me. So, and for sin, that's for me. Then what did he do? He condemned sin in the flesh. So when we look at our Messiah being the end of all things, we look at him. So if he condemns sin in the flesh, that means I can condemn sin in the flesh. If he condemns sin in the flesh, I can condemn sin in the flesh. Now, how do I condemn sin in the flesh? It's the next verse. Number 4, that the righteousness of what? Now, how am I going to know the righteousness in it if I do away with it? So the righteousness that is in the law might be fulfilled in us. Now he goes back to this walk now. He goes back to this walk because if it's fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh, but after what? The Spirit. So in order for me to walk after the Spirit, I have to know the righteousness that's in the law. Absent of understanding the righteousness that's in the law, I will not be able to walk after the Spirit. I'm going to continue my walk after the flesh. Verse number 5, for they that are after the flesh, what do? Mind the things of the flesh. Because remember now, there's a law in my members. So if I'm walking after the flesh, I'm going to mind those things. But they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Now, verse number 7, then I want to move to, I want to go to Deuteronomy Chapter 10. Because the carnal mind is an enemy against Elohim. Why is the carnal mind an enemy to Elohim? Why? It says it right there. He gives you the answer. Why is the carnal mind enmity or an enemy against Elohim? It says it right there, right? For it is not subject to what? To the law of Elohim. Neither indeed can be. That's why if we're following in the flesh and the carnality, lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, if I'm following after that, I'm not subject to his law. And I can't be because I'm walking after the flesh. You know, you can tell those who are following after the Spirit and those who have the Spirit. How do you know those who have the Spirit are walking after the Spirit? How do you know those who do that? And I know you have, it says the reason why they're an enemy of him is because they can't be subject to his law. And so you're an enemy of him. So how do I know those who are subject to his law? How do I know those who do have the Spirit? How do I know? Because he tells us a tree is known by the fruit they bear. So if you don't have spiritual fruit, then you're not walking after the Spirit. You don't have the Spirit. It's pretty much that simple. Let's go there real quick. Galatians 5 and verse number 22. Galatians 5:22. So if I'm walking after the Spirit and I'm understanding the righteousness that is in the law, I know that my spirit is bearing fruit. For the fruit of the Spirit is love. So didn't he say that you had to love your neighbor as you love yourself? He says all of the law and the prophets hang on 2 commandments. So I'm known by the fruit I bear. If I'm absent of love, I don't have his Spirit. Don't be deceived. Elohim is not mocked. Whatever a man soweth, that he's going to reap. So if you ain't got the fruit of love, You don't have his spirit. Don't fool nobody. Okay, so he goes on and he says, joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Now listen to what he says. Against such there is no law. Because when you keep the righteousness of the law, you bear fruit. There's no law against that. There's no law against the fruit that bears from the Spirit. Ain't no law against that. You cannot put the law of Musha up against the fruit of the Spirit, because the law of Musha is spiritual. He's always wanted the teachings of the law to be spiritual. Always. So let's go to Deuteronomy, and I'm going to start with verse number 12. Deuteronomy 10 and verse number 12. I'm going to start there. And now, Yasharal, what doth Yah thy Elohim require of thee? What does he require of thee? But to fear Yahuwah thy Elohim. Now, in order to fear him, number one, I have to grow in knowledge. And number two, I have to depart from what? Evil. So the fear of Yah is the beginning of knowledge, growing in knowledge, and to depart from evil. So is that spiritual? Is he intending to get to your spirit? Now remember, our foundational scripture is Yahuchanan 4:22, 23 and 24, and 22. He says, "Ye worship, you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvations of the Yahudim." For the Father is looking for what? True worshipers that would worship him in spirit and in truth. He's always been looking for that. The teaching of Musha has always meant to be spiritual, not just natural. It's got to be spiritual, because when it's spiritual, now I'm going to bear fruit. So he says, to fear Yahuwah thy Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve Yahuwah thy Elohim with all thy heart and with all thy soul, to keep the commandments of Yahuwah and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Now, we're going to come back here, but let's look at Yirmiyah, who they say is Jeremiah 6:16. Remember what he says? He says, I want you to walk in my what? In my ways. I want you to keep my commandments. Now, Yahusha said in Yahuchanan 14:15, he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Okay, so let's look at Yirmiyah, who they say is Jeremiah 6:16. Yirmiyah 6:16. They call Jeremiah. Thus saith Yahuwah, stand ye in my ways, and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. We're not going to do it. I know the book says to do it, but we're not going to do it. We're going to go about and establish our own righteousness. I'm going to establish my own righteousness, not the righteousness of Elohim. He's not changing anything that's written in this book. Nothing's going to change. we're going to be held to the standard of this book. We're going to be held to what was taught, the commandments of this book. That's what we're going to be held to. So back to Deuteronomy 10, and we left off on verse number 15. 10:15. Only Yahuwah had a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all people as it is this day. Now, verse number 16, what does he say? What does he want you to do? Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart. So is he dealing with flesh or spirit? He's dealing with the spirit. His teaching has always, it was meant to be spiritual. When he gave us the commandments, it's meant to be spiritual. Because if you keep them, you're walking after the Spirit. If you have his Spirit, you're going to bear the fruit of it. A tree is known by the fruit it bears. So circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart and quit fighting against it. And be no more stiff-necked. Because you got some folks, he's dealing with the spirit. The foreskin of the flesh, when he's talking about the foreskin of the flesh, he's not dealing with your heart. The foreskin of the flesh was of the male seed to separate them from all the other male seed that was in the land. Because in order to get into the temple, you had to show if you were circumcised or not. That's why King Daud said, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of Yah than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. Now we know what goes on in the tents of wickedness. We know what goes on in those tents. But the doorkeeper had to make sure that every male that went in there was circumcised. That's the doorkeeper. That was one of the lowliest jobs. You mean you had to check all them packages? You had to check them all. You got to check the packages. Make sure they're circumcised. So when he's talking about the circumcision here, he's not dealing with the flesh. He's talking about the heart. It's spiritual now. He's always wanted it to be spiritual. Anybody that talks about the law was for the flesh in the old, but it's for the spirit in the new, it was always meant to be spiritual. Always. Because when you're dealing with his word, if I'm walking after the spirit, I'm going to fulfill what's written in his word. And look at verse number 17, for Yahweh. Now, there's only two words that they use here, but let's read it in the context or in the actual language, and you'll see the difference here. For Yahuwah, your Elohim, is Elohim of Els. And he's Adon of Adonais, a great Elohim, a mighty and a terrible, which regardeth not persons, nor taketh reward. So he's not going to look at just because you're Israel or not. Just because you're Israel, you made it in. He don't have no respect of person. He's not going to do that. He did give it to Yasharal. What advantage does Yasharal have? Much in every way, because unto them was given the oracles. But just because you're Yasharal don't mean you're going to make it. Because he has no respect of person. He doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and widow, and loveth what? In verse number 18, he loveth what? The stranger, and giving him food and raiment. Verse 19, love ye therefore the stranger, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. So the strangers here is Egypt was a stranger. Ethiopians were strangers, Ethiopian nation. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, all them ites, they were all strangers. The Assyrians were strangers. The Greek were strangers. The Romans were strangers. But he tells us you got to love them anyway. Love them too, because you were a stranger. You know what it's like to be a stranger in a land that's not yours. And so where is Yasharal today? Well, they're scattered to the 12 corners. They're the 12 corners, I'm sorry. The four corners. They're scattered to the four corners. They're in their enemy's land. But even though Israel is in their enemy's land and in captivity, everybody who's born of the water and spirit can still keep the righteousness that is in this law. They still can keep the righteousness, no matter where you're at. So I'm getting close to finishing up here in Ezra. Ezra chapter 9. And I'm going to start at, I want to look at, there's just something. Let's look at verse, I want to read verse 7, verse 8. Then I want to go down to verse, I'm going to look at verse 13. Let's look at verse, then I'm going to go down to verse 13. 7 and 8, then I want to go down to verse 13. Since the days of our fathers have we been in a great trespass unto this day. Now, kind of setting this up, a lot of the Bible scholars know that, you're dealing with Ezra here. The kingdoms, the northern and the southern kingdom, are gone now. They're in captivity. You have some who were still in the land, but those who were in the land were actually in captivity to those who had conquered the land. He had given them over. He first gave up the northern kingdom to the Syrian empire. Then he gave up the southern kingdom first to the Babylonian empire, then the Medes Persian. And so about this time, you're dealing with the empire of the Mede Persian. This is before the Greek empire and then the Roman empire. So they don't really have their kingdom, their kings and their kingdom. They don't have that. But one thing they do have is they still had Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, they had the temple. It had been destroyed. So the king, you had Artaxerxes, his son, actually gave them, his father had done it, but you had Cyrus was one of them, Artaxerxes, Darius, and I think the names that they gave them were pretty much, it was kind of like a title, because it was the king, Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes, I can't really pronounce it. It's kind of hard to pronounce. But I just kind of want to set some of that up. But verse number 8, and now for a little, or verse number 7. Since the days of our fathers have we been in a great trespass unto this day, and for our iniquities have we, our kings, our priests, been delivered into the hand of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, and to a spoil, and to confusion of face, as it is this day. Now the reason, they went into captivity and everything. They're in captivity. Confusion of face. The reason why they're talking about the confusion of face is because now Israel, Yasharal, is being diluted into all these other nations. And he says this is confusion of face because you can't tell us from anybody else now. They just kind of blended in to all these other nations. And he says that's confusion of face. Now, verse number 8, and now for a little space, grace hath been shown from Yahuwah our Elohim. And what was that space grace? To give us, to leave us what? A remnant to escape. Even the doctrine of remnant goes all the way back to when the whole nation was in captivity. Because Brother Shaul brings this out in Romans chapter 11. But he said, because of a space of grace, you've left us a remnant. And what is that remnant supposed to do? Escape. A remnant is supposed to escape. And to give us a nail or some security in his holy place, that our Elohim may lighten our eyes and give us a little reviving while we're in bondage. So, and we're going to see how as we go down here. So it was Israel was like all the other nations. They had blended in to be like all the other nations. There was no separation. They didn't even identify as Israel. They had completely blended in with these other nations. Does that sound familiar? Kind of sounds like what's going on today. Just complete. So he says, give us some space, just a little space of grace, so that a remnant can escape. Because everybody ain't going to escape, but a remnant is going to escape. Now, let's go down. Let's look at verse number 10 and then go down to verse 13. Let's look at verse 10. And now, our Elohim, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments. He always wanted Israel to keep his commandments. And even though they could not keep the entirety of it because they were no longer a nation, they were scattered, they were in captivity, he still wanted them to keep the righteousness that was in the law or in the commandments. He still wanted them to keep that righteousness that was in it. Okay. Verse number 13. And after all that is come upon us for our evil deeds and for our great trespass, seeing that thou, our Elohim, has punished us less than our iniquities deserve. Y'all hear that? Even after all he had done to them. Now this is the prayer of Ezra. This is his prayer. This is the prayer of Ezra. So even after all that we done, our punishment is not even as great as our iniquities. That's his prayer. They had been the sword, captivity, idolatry, all other kind of people blended in with all the kind of nations. He says our iniquities is greater than what you've punished us with, and has given us such deliverance as this. Now listen to verse number 14. Should we again break thy commandments and join in what? Affinity with the people of these abominations. I mean, he's like, and really he's talking to the remnant. There's only going to be a remnant that's going to escape, that's going to get out. So he says, should we again keep breaking commandments and join affinity with the people and all of their abominations? You have countries and heathens and cultures that get caught up in idolatry. Should we join or again align ourselves with the affinity of these people? When I know to do better, should I do better, or should I fall into the affinity of this culture and this nation? Yes.
I just want to
Yeah, the season that we're in. What? Now this is his prayer. This is a prayer. He's praying. And he's praying for Yasharal, the whole nation. But then he starts to pray for just the remnant. Because when he said confusion of faces, I don't know who Israel is. They blended in with all the other nations. I don't know. We don't know, but give us a remnant, that we can come out and be delivered. We've committed great trespasses. We have. And the trespasses that we have done is greater than the punishment that you put on us. That's how Ezra's seen it. Yes. No, because if you keep reading the end of this chapter, and then go into the 10th chapter, he explains what the confusion of face is. He explains that because he said, all of us have done this. All of us, we've blended in with these other nations. Our sons have taken their daughters. Our daughters have taken their sons. The children, we gave our children. We just blended in. So there's confusion of face now. Right. We can't distinguish who is Israel. We don't know. They blended in with all the other nations. Because Israel has always done that. Now, Musha had a Midianite because his father-in-law was Jethro. And there are Midianites because Jethro was a Midianite. Where did the Midianites come from? Huh? They're actually from Keturah. And Keturah was Abraham's second wife after Sarah died. And Keturah gave him some sons. One of his sons' name was Midian. And from Midian, you get the Midianites. So Jethro was a Midianite. And Jethro gave his daughter to Musha because remember, Musha was on the run. He left Egypt for his life. And that's where he met Zipporah. And Jethro, his father-in-law, and Jethro gave him Zipporah. They were Midianites, which were actually of the seed of Abraham. Now, they weren't of the promised seed because the promised seed came through Isaac, Yishak, and then Jacob. But they were of Abraham's seed. But in the 12th chapter of Numbers, now Musha, and they were in the wilderness, and who did Musha marry? He married an Ethiopian. And then Miriam and Aaron got hot and said, why'd you do that? And he struck Miriam with leprosy because you don't speak against his anointed. He let Musha marry an Ethiopian woman. And he didn't judge him on that. So he's saying, why are you going to judge? If you look at that dialogue that he had with all three of them, because he told all three of them to come up in there, and you listen to that dialogue, he says, I talked to Moses like a man talks to his friend. This is my friend. Why weren't you afraid to speak against him? I see what he did. That's my friend. You spoke against him. And Miriam was struck with leprosy, and then she got well, she died. Aaron died, couldn't go in. Because they spoke against Musha. Now, Musha took an Ethiopian woman. It was allowed by the Most High. But the point I'm trying to make was that was pretty common for them. In the 24th chapter of Leviticus, in the 24th chapter of Leviticus, you had an Israelite woman who gave birth and had a son by who? An Egyptian. Yes. His father was Egyptian, his mother was an Israelite. And he took the name in vain. So they said, what should we do? Most High said, kill him. But his father was an Egyptian and his mother was an Israelite. So when they went into the wilderness, it says they came out a mixed multitude. So Israel was mixed with Egyptians, Ethiopians that we know for sure, and might have been some other, because they came out of mixed multitude. And so Yasharal again was, you see it with Musha, you see it with that woman who was an Israelite, all in the wilderness. So the point I'm trying to make, it was not uncommon for them to blend in with these other nations, but it got to the point where almost the whole seed was diluted. Because it talks about the royal seed. It said the seed is, we have confusion of faith. We don't know who's who. Yes. I don't know. It doesn't really say. She might have been dead. That's why he took the Ethiopian. It could be. The book doesn't say. But it could be. Because Musha's first wife, Zipporah, she got upset at Musha when she circumcised her grown sons and took that foreskin, and what did she do with it? Threw it at his feet and says, "You're a bloody man." So maybe the Most High took her life. We don't know. He could have. And then he said, well, I'm going to get me another wife. And he got an Ethiopian. Because they said, why you marry Ethiopia? Even with Samson, he wanted the daughters of the Canaanites. And his mom and dad says, why do you want one of those daughters? Can't you choose somebody in Israel? I mean, so that was kind of habitual with Israel, was to get into other nations. And so you see that here, and that's where you have the confusion of faith. So he says in verse number 14, because I want to finish up here, should we again break thy commandments and join in affinity with the people of these abominations? It was the other nations, the wives. Shaluma had so many wives, and these other women, strangers, that drew his heart away. And they fell into idolatry. And so he says, should we again join affinity with the people of these abominations? We know what they're doing. We know that their gods are idols. We know that. We know that we're not supposed to practice idolatry. We shouldn't be caught up in Mithra or Astarte or any of that. We shouldn't be caught up in nothing like that. We ought to know that. So why are we, if we're the remnant, why are we again joining ourselves to the affinity of the abominations of these people? Wouldest not thou be angry with us till thou hadst consumed us, so that there should be, no remnant, nor escaping? We're totally destroyed. We're just totally destroyed. Is there going to be a remnant when he returns? Is there going to be anybody that has escaped? Didn't Yahusha say in Luke, the 18th chapter, and he gives that parable about the unjust judge and the woman that kept, because first he says men ought to always pray and not faint. But then after he gives that parable, he says, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith? Is there going to be a remnant? Is there going to be anybody? Is anybody going to stand up? You can't look to the church. You can't look to the church. The church ain't standing up against that. Church got Christmas trees in them. They probably got Santa Claus, Santa Christ. They got all that stuff. They have Easter egg hunts. They have trunk and treat. They have all that stuff. You cannot look to the church for the remnant or for the escaping. Not unless you got somebody that's standing up to it. There might be some that says, hey, we're not taking no part of it. We're not. We're not even going to acknowledge it. If you can find one, it's very few. It's just the remnant. There's only going to be a remnant. Only going to be a remnant that'll be able to escape. O Yah Elohim of Yasharal, thou art righteous, for we remain yet escaped as it is this day. Behold, we are before thee in our trespass, For we cannot stand before thee because of this. Who is going to be able to stand when our Messiah comes and you fail to all the pagan practices? Who's going to stand? How can you say you trust in him and you're bowing down and worshiping idols? How can you say you stand for him? You're the remnant, I've escaped, and you've done everything that the heathens have done. How are you going to do it? This is his prayer. This is Ezra's prayer. Now, these are some deep prayers. These are some deep prayers. When you look at the prayer of Ezra, you look at the prayer of Daniel in the 9th chapter, and you see them some deep prayers. And they prayed for the nation. They prayed for the people. They pleaded on the behalf of the people. Because Yasharah, Israel, has always been a stiff-necked people. And now you got people saying, there is no law. There is no commandments. I don't have to keep no commandments. And they're leading a lot of people. So are we going to continue to join ourselves affinity to people who are doing these abominations? Because like Yahusha said, when I come back, am I going to find faith? Where's that verse at? I think it's in Luke, but he said he wanted to kindle a fire. I want to kindle a fire. It's in Luke somewhere. I know it's the 10th chapter, 12th chapter, somewhere around there. But because he said, I didn't come to bring peace on earth, but a sword. I came to separate. I'm going to separate houses. So what we have as far as the righteousness that's in the law, we can still keep the righteousness that's in the law, even though we're in captivity, even though we're in a land that's not ours, even though this country who say they're sometimes I look at that and they talk about we're a Christian nation. Really? You look at all stuff that's going on and you're going to try to tell me you're a Christian nation? No, you're not after the Messiah. This nation is not after the Messiah. This nation would actually kill our Messiah if he came here. They'd want to kill him. He definitely couldn't go up into a lot of these churches. He couldn't go up there. They'd put him out. They'd want to kill him. Even his own people. His own people. Because he says, I've come unto my own receive me not. Okay. Any questions or comments? We're going to, those who are going over to Sister Lorraine's memorial service, we're going to break at this time and head over there. And keep your prayers going up for the families. Sister Eileen Smith and her family, we got to keep them up in prayer. We lost Brother Rocky Smith this morning. So let's pray for them and be there for them. And we're in that hour we have to strengthen our heart. You've heard me say it before. You got to be strong in heart. Have to be strong in character. You have to be we have to fully commit. This is it. You know, what's written in the word, this is it. That's what I'm going to keep. No matter what anybody says. We're in a time now, I mean, you know, we have to prepare our hearts for separation of loved ones and things like that. But I still got to stand strong. I still got to remain strong and be obedient unto his word, because Hebrews 5:9 says, being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all those that obey him. So if I want eternal salvation, I have to be obedient, and be obedient unto death. And my paradigm, my model is Yahusha Meshiach. who the world calls Jesus Christ. That's my model. That's who I have to pattern myself after. That's who Shaul says, follow me as I follow him, or imitate me as I imitate him. And if you think he falls to paganism and idolatry, you got the wrong one. You got the wrong one. We ain't supposed to put no other El or God before him. None whatsoever. He'll cut you off and make you think you're still living. You keep doing idolatry. You keep following that idolatry. You won't be a part of that remnant that's going to escape if you keep falling to that idolatry. It's time for us to stand and be strong. I'll be glad when all this is over. This is the 7th day of dedication. Tomorrow's the 8th day of dedication. And then, we've got our next feast day will be the 14th of Abib, which would be the first month on the Hebrew calendar. That 14th day is Passover. And we'll be leading up to Passover, and we'll be preparing ourselves for the Passover. And for the Passover as he is our Passover lamb, and having the Last Supper. All right. So if there's no other questions or comments, then we thank you for being a part of this. We say Shabbat Shalom to all of Yahusha and all sojourners, those to the four corners, the 12 tribes to the four corners of the earth, and those who are in the will. Yahusha said, these are my brothers and sisters, those who do the will of my Father. So if you're not in his will, then you're not his brother or sister. And so we say Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Let's keep one another up in prayer. And I've got to hasten along here. So with that, I say Shabbat Shalom.